Hey, what's going on, everyone? So today I'm going to be installing rear airbag suspension on my Hummer H3. Now this video isn't going to be a tutorial per se, but I'm more just bringing you guys along as I'm doing the install. The reason why I'm doing it this way is because this is not going to be a simple bolt-on install. Rather, we will need to make permanent modifications and welding is required. Also, it would be extremely useful if you had access to a lift when you're doing this project. I do want to say that this install is somewhat specific to my H3, and if you guys wanted to do this, you will probably have to do things a little bit different, especially if you have an H3T, might be slightly different. Also, I do want to give credit to Josh, as he was the first guy to try this out with the specific parts that we will be doing. I know other people have, but he's the first one that used these parts. Now, before we begin, I want to explain to you why I'm doing this in the first place. So reason number one why I'm adding bags is because of this. As you can see here, the cargo area is completely filled. On the bottom, I got the Schmitty-built 2763 security storage vault, which is basically just a slide-out drawer. And then on the top, I got some Milwaukee pack-out boxes that house all of my tools. On the top, I got a Pelican case where I hold some spare parts. And then this tire right here is pretty big. This is a 38-inch tire, and the tire and the wheel together weigh about 130 pounds. For reference, a stock tire weighs somewhere around 65 pounds. And then also on here, I do got a Gobi ladder. So I got a lot of weight in the back. And the second reason is this. My rear leaf springs are sagging. As you can kind of see here, the back is sitting at 7 inches. And the front is sitting at about 10.5 inches. So you may be quick to write this off and think that all the weight I've added back here is causing the leaf springs to sag so much. But these are actually the 4-inch Rancho lift kit leaf springs. And this lift kit has been on here for a number of years. And these leaf springs are starting to go bad as they show their age. What stinks is you can't just call up Rancho and get replacements because the lift kit has been discontinued. And I can't use factory OEM leaf springs on here because they wouldn't fit, they would be too small, because the Rancho ones are larger. I was thinking about getting these leaf springs re-arced, but I did kind of want something that could handle the additional weight that I was carrying. I was also looking into getting some new custom-made springs for my H3, but I talked to another H3 owner that also has the 4-inch Rancho lift kit, and he actually got some done, and it costed around $1,300, which is kind of on the expensive side. In comparison, this airbag install that we're going to be doing is around $500, and this is something that I could do myself here in the garage. Now for my setup, I'm just going to keep things pretty basic and run air lines to the back of my H3 and then mount a valve where I can use an external air compressor to add air to it. I know a lot of the times when you see air suspension setups, you'll have an onboard air compressor, and then inside the vehicle you'll have some kind of switches where you can add air or even let air out depending on what you want. I'm not really interested in doing that to my H3 because I literally have like 10 other wiring projects to do, and also I really just don't need to adjust the amount of air in the bags every time I go for a drive. All I really want out of this airbag setup is just to handle the extra weight and the sagging leaf springs. So I'm just going to use a basic 12-volt cigarette lighter air compressor that I can plug into the back of the H3 so I can easily add air if needed. So next up, we can go ahead and take a look at some of the parts that we're going to be using. Basically, it's a Firestone airbag kit. It is an actual kit, just not one made specifically for the H3. So there are going to be some modifications required in order to get it to fit. Now, in general, I'm not sure if there's any H3 specific airbag kits. That way you could actually avoid doing the welding that we're going to be doing here today. The reason why I'm going with this Firestone airbag kit is some of my other Hummer friends that I know have installed this specific kit on their H3, and they said it worked out really well, so that's why I'm installing it. But again, as I said in the beginning of the video, I'm just taking you guys along as I do this install, so this isn't a regular type tutorial video, so definitely keep that in mind. Even if I were to get a H3 specific airbag kit, it may not work out for me since the airbag kit would be based off a stock H3, and on my H3 I got the 4-inch Rancho lift kit, and I also got some extended shackles on here, so that could change it. As you'll see in this video, lining up the airbag itself and the cup or the spacer on the bottom is going to be one of the most difficult parts to get perfect. There are going to be a lot of fine adjustments that will need to be made in order to get the airbag to connect perfectly with the cup. So I think if I had a H3 specific airbag kit, it might not work because the suspension geometry would be all thrown off due to the lift. All right, so real quick, I want to go over all the parts we're going to be using for this install. So all the parts right here are part of a Firestone airbag kit. So in the kit, you obviously get airbags, and then you get these mounts right here. We will be using these, but we won't actually, I don't think we're going to actually be using this, these mounts right here or this. We will be using this. This is actually a heat shield to protect one of the airbags from the exhaust. Also in the kit, you get hardware, some air fitting stuff, and you also get a air line. So that covers the airbag parts. Moving over to here, this and this are two separate pieces. Basically what we got right here is basically our bump stops per se. So on the bottom right here, we have spacers, and then on top right here, we got cups. So what we're going to be doing is combining both of these together and putting them on the bottom, removing the Rancho little cube thing as a bump stop and putting these in, because obviously our airbags are not tall enough to reach that. So I know this looks like a lot of parts, but we're not actually going to be using it all. We're not using that or these right here. We will be using everything else, but it should make for a pretty easy install. So let's go ahead and do an overview of what we're going to be doing. So as you can see right here, this is where we're going to be installing the airbag. What we're going to need to do is remove that bump stop, cut off the bump stop bracket, and then put our new Firestone bracket into place. This bracket is just slightly big because I believe it's for a Silverado, so we will have to push it in. The bracket's obviously not going to go right here, it's going to go right there, but just for demonstration, as you can kind of see, that's where our bracket's going to be, and then we're going to go ahead and weld it on. Also, what we got to do, and before we can start welding the bracket, is we got to put on our spacer and our cup. So we're going to go ahead and replace this little cube thing right here. This cube is not actually from the factory. This is actually a component of the 4-inch Rancho lift kit. So the reason why you get this part in the first place with the Rancho lift kit is now the axle is much farther away from the frame, and we got to be able to have our bump stop up there, you know, to limit the suspension travel of the axle, or the tires will just end up rubbing against the body of the vehicle. So that's why they're in there, but we're no longer going to need them because we're going to be using those spacers instead as our bump stop. Also, what we could do on just the passenger side of the vehicle is install this included heat shield. So this will basically just be right about here and protect the airbag from the exhaust, because as you can see, the exhaust is a little bit close, not too close on this side, but on this side it's nowhere near it. So I don't think you need this, but just to be on the safe side, I can go ahead and add this bracket when the time comes. So the first thing I'm going to do is take off this bracket so I can put on the new spacer and cup kit. And then also probably what I'm going to do before that is take off this ABS line right here so it's out of the way, because I'm definitely going to need to take it off when I go to cut this bump stop bracket. Alright, got that off. Alright, now I'm just going to clean the top of this mount off. Let's go ahead and get these bump stops out. Mine were basically brand new, so they were very easy to take out. Now we can go ahead and build our bump stops / cups. So I'm actually recording this part after I've gotten everything done. The reason why is I originally went with these 3-inch spacers right here, and after putting on the airbags, I found that they were sufficient, but I did actually have to run the airbags at a higher pressure in order to get the truck to sit level. So I wanted just to go ahead and buy these, which are 4-inch spacers, just to have a little bit more height, because in order to run this level, I had to run it about 60 or 80 psi. So I'm hoping with just a 1-inch bump, I could go ahead and bring that down to maybe 30 psi or 40 psi. So we can go ahead and put these to the side for now. I probably won't be using them. Again, if you do this project yourself, you may have to test the 3-inch, 4-inch, or 5-inch out depending on your setup. I have actually cranked my front torsion bars. That's why the front sits a little bit higher, because originally I didn't have them cranked. Let's go ahead and take a look at the spacers we're going to be using. So on the top of it, we have 3 holes. We're only going to be using this middle hole right here. As you can see, we got a hole right in the middle of our cup, so we'll thread that bolt through right into here, and we can go ahead and tighten that up, and we'll be good. On the bottom of the spacer, we do have 3 holes as well, but these holes have welded nuts onto them, so we do have threads, which is really nice. So originally, the idea they had with this Firestone kit is you would just go ahead and take the included bolts and thread it in like that. But unfortunately, that's just not going to work out for us because of how the H3 is with its leaf spring pad. So here is the leaf spring pad. As you can see, there's the hole on top of it. And basically, I can't fit the stock bolt that comes with the kit. It can't be threaded through here. As you can kind of see, I can kind of get it close, but I can't get it any more than that. So we can't use a bolt on the bottom of here, and that's why we're going to be using a nut. What we'll have to do instead is use a longer bolt and thread it the opposite way. So we'll have to put the bolt right in the back of it and then start threading it. So we'll go ahead and keep screwing this in until the bolt head actually touches the bottom of this and it's tight in here. Once that's in there, we can just go ahead and slide this right into our leaf spring pad hole that's already there, so we don't need to do any more additional drilling. And then we could just go ahead and use a flange nut on the bottom. You'll have to get this separately. They do give you some nuts and lock washers and regular washers in here, but I found it a lot easier just to use a flange nut, so you don't have to, you know, basically line up this on the top of each other and try to like hold it in there with a wrench. So the bolts and nuts that I'm going to be using that are not included in the kit is this extended one that I got right here. So this is a 3/8 16, and this bolt is 1.5 inches long. The stock one is like an inch long. It's just not long enough for our specific application. And then of course we just got a 3/8 16 flange nut to go along with it. Let's put this together. A word of advice, I would put this extended bolt in here first before you put on the cup bolt because you might not have enough clearance. Now let's put the cup on. So I already got my bolt and washer in here, so let's thread that through and then put on our washer on the other side, and then our nylon nut. Tighten that up. I'm going to take a pair of vice grips to hold it and then use an impact to tighten it. And then there, all tightened down. Now just to drop in the bump stop, like that. Take our wrench and flange nut, and this is why I want to use a flange nut, because I can hold it like this. So lift that up a little, put it like that, and just start using the bump stop to screw it in. Now I'm just going to tighten it up a little bit more. Alright, now that is solid and not moving. And here are where the modifications begin. So first we got to go ahead and cut off both of the bump stop brackets. They're welded on there, so the only way to take them off is to cut them off. Here's what it looks like off the truck. I'll probably go ahead and save these, even though I'm probably not going to have a use for them. There was still a little tab on there from the bracket attached onto the frame, so that needed to be cut off as well. Next up, small areas on the frame needed to be grinded down to expose the bare metal in preparation for welding the Firestone bracket onto the frame. So first we can go ahead and take a look at the airbags we got. They do have a threaded hole on the top of them, and you need to go ahead and screw in the included 90-degree angle 1/4 inch push to connect fitting with a wrench. Also on top of the airbag, we have 2 threads, which will be used to connect it to the Firestone mounting bracket that we will be welding to the frame. The flange nuts are included in the kit, so you don't need to worry about buying your own. Next up, I went ahead and put the airbag and bracket together because we need to go ahead and get an idea where the mounting bracket needs to be welded onto the frame. As you can see here, our axle is clearly sitting at an angle, so in turn, the new bump stops are as well. I definitely wanted to take this into account, so instead of just welding the bracket level with the frame, I wanted to match the angle so the airbag and cup perfectly connect together. I wanted to make sure that the contact between these two pieces was almost perfect, so the airbag doesn't look lopsided and saggy. So to help me find the correct placement for the mount, I went ahead and put some floor jacks under the axle of the H3 so I could lower it to a normal ride height with the tires being off. By doing this, it will bring the airbag into contact with our cup, allowing us to find the correct angle and position that the airbag needs to be in. Obviously, when you got an H3 suspended up in the air using a lift, our axle is at full droop and the airbag does not come in contact at all with the cup because the rear suspension is maxed out. So you got to go ahead and bring it down to simulate how the H3 sits when it is off the lift and has the tires on. Once this was done, you can now outline the position of where the mount needs to sit with a marker. After that, self-tapper screws were screwed into the frame in order to hold up the Firestone bracket in the approximate position that it was going to be in. Now, these self-tapper screws are not going to be staying, they are just temporary. They ended up being extremely useful because it allowed me to test the full range of the suspension travel and also to make very small, fine adjustments to ensure that the airbag would perfectly come into contact with the cup. Once the placement of the airbag mount was marked on both sides, there was still more work to do before the bracket could actually be welded in. As you can see here, this Firestone bracket was clearly made for a larger sized frame, so what we're going to do here to fix that is add some more metal material onto this bracket so it will be a snug fit. If you guys want it, you don't necessarily need to do this. You could just bend these little tabs on the bracket inward so they come in contact with the frame, but I wanted to do it this way. I do want to say that I had my dad help me with this part because by no means is welding my strong suit. We also went ahead and added some material onto one side of the bracket that would be sitting lower at an angle. This extra material would allow the bracket to come in contact with the frame instead of just relying on the weld. Also, it would help to fill up the gap, make it look a little bit nicer. After that, we were finally ready to weld the brackets into their final position. Obviously, the airbags were taken off when doing this, so they would be out of the way. So for my setup, I only wanted to weld the bracket tabs on the side of the frame and not weld anything on the bottom part of the bracket. The reason why it was done this way, so it would make it easier if the bracket ever needed to be cut off and relocated. Say in the future I want to do a spring over axle conversion, the angle and position of the axle would most likely change, so I still want to be able to cut off the airbag bracket so it could be moved into a new position. So it only makes sense to weld less, making it easier to remove. That being said though, we did go ahead and weld it on both sides, so all 4 tabs per bracket were welded into place. Once the welding was done, we could go ahead and add some paint, put a couple coats on there, and then we could reattach the airbags onto the Firestone bracket. Now all that's left is to hook up the air lines. We could start by finding a place to mount our valve that will be used to add air or let air out of the bags. So funny enough, if you look behind the H3 trailer hitch, there's actually already a hole there that's being covered by the towing information sticker. So I went ahead and poked a hole into it and mounted the valve there. I do want to say that not all H3s have this trailer hitch on them. This hitch was actually part of a factory optional add-on called the tow package. Basically, you got a 2-inch trailer receiver, a 7-pin towing plug, and a rear bumper that had a cutout for the receiver. From what I've seen, a lot of well-optioned H3s did come with the tow package, but most of the time the base models with the cloth seats did not have them. That being said, there was still a good amount of H3 owners that bought aftermarket hitch receivers if their H3 didn't have the tow package. But on those aftermarket ones, the trailer receiver does sit a lot lower. The reason being is you don't have a cutout on the bumper for the receiver like you get with the tow package. So if you don't have the OEM trailer hitch, you may have to find another place to mount the valve if you decide to run the air lines to the back of the H3 like I did. Now let's go ahead and connect our airbags to the valve. Also, you do got to remember to insert the airbag heat shield if you want to use it. I went ahead and made a cut on it so I would be able to remove it without having to disconnect the airline. So how these air fittings work is you simply just insert the tubing into the fitting and that's it, you're good. Do be careful, however, because once you insert the tube, it won't be able to come out. The only way to get it out is by pulling on it and then using some vice grips. It's just not fun, so try to get it right the first time. So on these air fittings, you get this replaceable push-in connector that's actually clamping the tube into place. And if you want to remove the tube, you will most likely break this piece, so you will need to get a replacement. The rest of the air fitting will be fine. It's just that small push-in connector piece. You'll have to replace that, so I definitely would recommend buying extras. From there, we can go ahead and route the tubing to go above the frame so it doesn't have any chance of catching on any kind of sticks or branches when off-road. So for my setup, I decided to connect both of the airbags together using a Union T fitting. So these two air lines will go to our single valve on the trailer hitch. Now technically, you don't have to do it this way, and you could choose to run the bags separate using 2 valves, but I didn't want to do that. The reason why I wanted to connect them together instead of running them separately is for better suspension travel and wheel articulation. So to demonstrate this and test out my new airbags, I went ahead and lifted up one of my rear tires with a forklift to fully max out the suspension. Here's a shot underneath the H3 as I go to lift up the tire. As you can see here, as the driver's side tire is being lifted up, it is compressing the driver's side airbag completely, but on the passenger side, the airbag is fully extended. So basically, what we're doing here is transferring all the air from the driver's side airbag into the passenger side airbag to allow for maximum suspension travel. Now you may be thinking, aren't I running the risk of popping my airbag? And the answer to that is no, I am not. The reason why is I'm not going to be running a whole lot of air pressure in here. I'm probably going to run about 30-40 psi. So these airbags are actually rated up to 100 psi. So if I'm running 40 psi normally and I go ahead and send another 40 psi over to one airbag, that is only 80 psi, so I'm still within the safe rating limits of the airbag. So that's why I'm always going to be running a lower air pressure on these. I'll probably always keep it under 50. If these two airbags were separate and had their own airlines, the air would not have anywhere to go. So as a result, they would not be able to be compressed as much as we're seeing now. What they would do instead is push back on our tire that is being lifted up and decrease the amount of suspension travel we have, essentially acting like a bump stop. Now that we got the airbag mounts on, I wasn't able to put the ABS lines back in their original spot using the plastic clip on here. So this really wasn't a big deal. I went ahead and relocated the ABS line by using a clip. This should definitely give me enough slack even when the suspension is at full droop. Okay, so this is going to be very specific to me and my setup, but basically I went ahead and changed the location of the inflation valve. The reason for this is I actually bought a rear Thor parts bumper to put on my H3. I just have yet to install it. So after taking a closer look, this aftermarket bumper has a much smaller cutout than the original tow package H3 rear bumper. So once I go to put this bumper on, it's actually going to cover up the inflation valve, so it's best to move it now so I don't have to worry about it later. Okay, so I'm going to be drilling a hole in here, but since I already got a hole in the back here, I kind of want to make them perfect. And paint the inside of this. Alright, let's go ahead and put the valve in. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and feed this through the hole right there, but I do want to go ahead and put a little bit of heat shrink on the actual tubing right here. This way, if it rubs against here, it's not going to cut the line. And that's it. It is in there. Here we got the new location, obviously not 100% ideal, but it'll work for me. I know if I had to tow something, I would have to put a receiver pin in and also attach some safety chains so they would kind of get close to the inflation valve, but I still should be good. But for the most part, I rarely tow anything with my H3, so it's just not something that I'm worried about. Now we're ready to put our H3 back on the ground and see how well our airbags and cups connect together. All right, and now our rear air suspension setup is complete, and we can go ahead and test it out. Obviously, right now, I don't have any air in the airbags. We'll go ahead and add that in just a sec. Before we do that, however, I did want to get some new baseline measurements for the front and the rear. The reason being is while doing this project, I did change a few things. The first thing that I ended up changing was the spacer for my bump stop setup. Originally, it was a 3-inch, and then I went ahead and moved to a 4-inch. So we can go ahead and measure that. So in the back right here, we have about 7 3/4, and we can go ahead and move up to the front, and we now have about 9 3/4. The reason why the front is now a little bit lower is I decided to lower the torsion bars just by about 1/2 inch. I might actually go a little bit lower. I might be sitting a little bit too tall, but those are just some baseline numbers. Now let's go ahead and fill this thing up with some air. So we got about 20 psi, 30, and here's about 40 psi. 40 psi is most likely what I'm going to be running it at, but anyway, let's go ahead and measure. So as you can see here, we got about 10 inches, which is perfect because the front is sitting at about 9 3/4. So we're basically level. I know it may be a little bit hard to tell the difference between the two because the truck was slowly rising, but if I go ahead and step out of frame real quick and flash it back and forth, you can immediately notice the difference. I mean, wow, look at that, how much height we get with these rear airbags. Now, technically, these airbags have a maximum rating of 100 psi, but you definitely do not want to be running anywhere near that number because you can run the risk of popping them, especially in my case where I have both of these airbags connected together through a single line. Now, just for fun, I can go ahead and fill this up higher just to show you what it looks like. We can go up to 100. I would never, ever actually run that number on the street, but sitting static, it should be okay. But let's go ahead and fill it up. So we're at 60, 80, 90, and just shy of 100. So this is what it looks like at 100 psi. Again, never run this on the street, sitting static, it's okay. But let's just go ahead and get a measurement. And we sit close to around 11 3/4, which is a lot higher. Not safe to run on the street, but it does look kind of cool like this. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and air this back down now. All right, and now we are back down to a much safer 40 psi. So as it sits now, I'm happy with the height. That being said, I still got to go ahead and take it off-road to see how the system performs and see if I have to make any fine-tuned adjustments. That's just kind of the nature of this project. There are a lot of fine-tuned adjustments that you'll have to make yourself if you want to take on this project. What worked for me may not work for you, so definitely keep that in mind. So I do realize by adding this rear air suspension to my H3, I did just introduce another point of failure, something that could break. So to help me prepare for that, I went ahead and bought some extra air fittings, as you can kind of see here. This right here is a 90-degree elbow, and then I got a extra valve, and then I got this push to connect piece right here. So if something were to happen and my airline were to get spliced in half, I could literally just go ahead, push it in this side, push it in this side, and I'm back on the trail, which is perfect. I also went ahead and took the extra tubing that they gave me in the Firestone kit, put it in the back of my truck, and I'm also thinking about getting a spare airbag so I can have all the parts I need if something were to go wrong with the kit. Technically, if something were to break, I could still drive the truck. I'm not at risk of rubbing or anything breaking or anything, but that's just kind of annoying. Even though my rear air suspension setup on here is pretty simple, I didn't get a lot of accessories, there's still stuff that can go wrong with it, and I want to be ready for that. So obviously I'm not always going to have a shop air compressor handy, so I went ahead and bought this, which is basically just a 12-volt little cigarette lighter style air compressor. This one's actually just from Harbor Freight. I didn't need anything too fancy. I can go ahead and open this up. As you can see here, got your basic 12-volt cigarette lighter, got the air compressor with the built-in gauge, and your airline. The reason why I wanted to get something like this is so I could easily just plug it into the back of the H3, fill up. I did actually have a bigger size air compressor. This is a Vire 300P. This is actually used for filling up tires and whatnot, but I didn't want to use that because that actually uses alligator clips, so you actually hook that right to the battery, and then you can go ahead and air up whatever you want. So this is just much easier because I don't really need that much air when I'm airing up. I just need a little bit, because to use that bigger one, I would have to pop the hood, go ahead and connect the battery terminals, then go ahead, connect all the hoses and stuff, and run it all the way back here, air it up, and then put everything away. This just makes life a lot simpler. It's very compact. I can keep it in the back here and air up the bags when I need to. And that's it. Overall, I'm super happy with how the rear air suspension turned out. It definitely fixed my sagging problem. I've had the problem now for a year or two and have been meaning to get to it. When I initially put on these bigger tires right here, I actually had to crank up the torsion bars in order to get them to fit, but then my back end started sagging, so I did have to lower the torsion bars so it didn't look like I was squatting that much. I wanted to try to make the truck level, but that wasn't a good thing because these tires started rubbing against the wheel wells because, you know, they couldn't fit in there with the torsion bars lowered like that. So thankfully, I was able to raise back up the torsion bars, and now I got clearance in there, and now I can actually use the truck off-road again without worrying about rubbing in the fender flares right there. So thank you guys so much for watching. I know this was a highly specific video, and a lot of you out there may not even have this problem, but I figure it might give you some ideas. So anyway, I will see you later.